Welcome back. It is a Wednesday, which means we bring you our weekly feature, Going Green. Now, South Africa has a conundrum, and we're looking at Africa's coal predicament. South Africa has an abundance of coal and has historically relied on coal to create the vast majority of our electricity. Coal production provides employment, and the country can barely afford more job losses. But coal also creates so-called dirty energy, and it's increasing our emissions that contribute to climate change. Well, Greenpeace has pointed out that the Witbank area in Mpumalanga has the world's dirtiest air because of the coal operations there. One of the researchers urging South Africa to move away from coal and to stop polluting the planet is Hilton Trollip, who is a senior research officer at the Energy Research Centre at UCT. Thank you for being with us via Skype from Cape Town. Hilton, is our reliance on coal dangerous?
Francis, as you point out, historically we've relied on coal to build our economy. And we also used to rely on coal, for example, to heat indoors in winter. So the question whether it's dangerous, it depends what you're using it for. If you've got an open brazier with coal inside a shack, you're definitely going to end up with respiratory diseases, which happens in many South African households, mainly poor ones. But equally, if you have a power station that burns coal and it doesn't have equipment on its chimneys to remove the particulates and the gases, it can also poison the people around that power station. So it can be dangerous, but it also can be very beneficial. The most important thing, though, is we've learnt about the dangers of coal, and we now have ways to mitigate those dangers or to avoid them completely. So, for example, we can use other methods to heat indoors instead of open braziers. And also we can fit equipment to power stations and factories so that they don't emit the dangerous particulates and gases, which they currently do. The thing is, South Africa does have the Air Quality Management Act and regulations which require factories to meet certain standards. The problem is that in many cases, very large organizations, possibly because of their political clout or whatever, manage year after year to get exemptions from those regulations. And Eskom in the Witbank area is a chief culprit of that.
Are you talking then about replacing coal stations or just managing them better?
Both. So in the short term, what we need to do is we need to recognize the actual health impacts of that bad air in many areas in South Africa and get Eskom, all those factories, to immediately close those stations or fit the required equipment. But what has happened over the past 5 to 10 years is that it is now cheaper, less expensive to close already at least 3 of our power stations, not finish building a big one that we're building, and instead to phase those out in a controlled way and replace them with wind and solar power backed up with gas. That has now become, not even considering greenhouse gas emissions, the economically rational thing to do. Going forward, beyond those 3 stations, Eskom's coal fleet is reaching the end of its economic life. And as this happens, it is also less expensive, according to research by the CSIR, by the Energy Research Centre at UCT, to, instead of extending the life of those stations or building new stations, to replace them with renewable energy options.
What do you say to the maybe hundreds of thousands, I'm not quite sure, how many people's livelihood is linked to coal? So you have the coal workers, then you have the people who transport the coal in trucks. Their unions are upset as well. There are predictions that some towns like Witbank and surrounding towns could become like ghost towns.
I agree with that, Francis. So what I say to that is that we're not talking about closing everything down tomorrow. We're talking about a phase out, a transition. We moved from, for example, horses to internal combustion engines. That took about 20 to 30 years. And as all of the people that used to grow horse feed or put horseshoes onto horses or stable horses became not necessary, whole new industries were born. So the thing is to realize this isn't a black and white argument of closing it down tomorrow. It's about committing to the changes and having a plan for it. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in those coal mining towns, there are about 80,000 coal miners. There are also all the families of those coal miners. And yes, they do tend to be concentrated in towns where they're coal miners. So we need plans for those people in the medium to long term. And in the short term, we need to keep them in their jobs while we put those plans into place.
All right, Hilton, we're losing the sound a little bit. Let me throw in one more question. Can you assess South Africa's commitment to this change that you're talking about? I remember when the Paris Agreement was signed, South Africa was saying we were going above and beyond what was expected of us. Is there the political will? If you look at the latest IRP, the plan for the next 10 years, are we going to get there if we carry on as we are now?
So, Francis, as in the answers to many questions, it's complicated. There are people, if you owned a coal mine, you'd be unlikely to want to give it up. So the worldwide fossil industry is pushing back, and South Africa's no exception. So we go through phases. In 2009, we led the world with our Copenhagen commitment, and we put that into our policy in 2011. But it's now nearly 10 years later, and that policy, what's called our nationally determined commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, is now recognized as highly insufficient by independent analysts. Once again, we're not alone in the world with that. Most countries, if you add up all the commitments, we're going to have catastrophic climate change. So we all have to what's called increase ambition. And it's quite possible to do that. It is economically rational. And once again, in South Africa, there are parts of government that are working very hard to do that. For example, the Department of Environment Affairs. And yet the other government departments, understandably, for example, the Department of Mineral Resources, that manages all the coal mines, is as committed to that change.
All right, losing the sound there, but I think we got the gist of what you're saying. Increase ambition to deal with dirty energy in South Africa. That was Hilton Trollip, Senior Research Officer at the Energy Research Centre at UCT. Thank you very much.